So then, now we can add new messages using this form over here. The next step is to be able to update the name, because at the minute, when we create a new chat room, we're hard coding this Sean value for the name. Now, I don't want every user to be called Sean in this chat room. I want them to decide that for themselves. So by default, when a user first comes to the page, I want the name to be anon for anonymous. Then they can update their name to whatever they want. And that's going to change this value inside the chats class up here, where we say the username, and therefore whenever they send messages, it's going to be their name and not Sean. Now we're also going to be using local storage so that when a user does update their name, it's going to store that in local storage. So if they cross off the chat window or refresh the page or come back later, then we're going to look for that name in local storage. If it exists, then we're going to automatically apply that name to the chat room. So then, let's start off by attaching an event listener to this form over here so we can tell when a user submits the form. So to do that, inside index, we can see that form down here, update name form, and this form has a class of new name. So let us now go to app.js, and underneath where we added a new chat, I'll do another comment to say update username, and then we're going to add an event listener to that element that we just found over here, new name. Now to do that, we need a query for that form. So we'll say const, and I'm going to call this new name form, and I'm going to set this equal to document.querySelector, and we want the new name form. So now we have a reference to that. We can go ahead and attach the event listener. So I'm going to say new name form.add event listener, and again this is a submit event. We fire a callback function and take in the event object as a parameter. First of all, we want to prevent the default action. Okay, so now we've done that, the next step is to actually get the data that a user types in. So again, we do that in a similar way to this over here. I'm going to store it in a constant. I'm going to say const new name is going to be equal to the new name form, which is this thing right here. So new name form, and then if we look inside this, inside the HTML, we can see that this input, it has an ID of name. So again, we can use dot notation to get a reference to this input field using this ID. And to do that, we can just say new name form dot whatever the ID is, which is name. Then we want the value from that field, and finally we want to trim it to get rid of any white space they might have entered. So now we have that value. The next thing we need to do is inside the chat class, call the method to update the name, because that updates the username on the class instance up here. So we need to call this method and pass in the new name that we just got. So let's come down here, and we want the chat room, which is our class instance defined down here. Then we want to call the update name method and pass in the new name, which is the constant right here, the value they type in to the input field. So now we're updating the name via the chat room, and I'm just going to leave a comment here to say what we're doing in each step. So update name via the chat room class, and then down here, what do we want to do? Well, when they've updated their name and we've updated it in the chat room class, whenever they send a new message, now we're going to use that name, so that's fine. But I also want to reset this form at this point, so that if they say something like Luigi, then press update, it clears this form in case they want to update the name again. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say now reset the form, and to do that we take the new name form, which is the reference to that form, and use the reset method that takes all the input fields inside that form and resets them. Now next, I want to be able to show the user some kind of feedback, some kind of message to say that, look, we know you've just updated your name and it's been updated. So to do that, we're going to output that text down here where we created this div called update message. So the first step is to get a reference on this so we can output some text inside it. So up where we get our DOM queries, I'm now going to say const, and we'll call this update message or message, and then set that equal to document.querySelector, and then whatever the class was, let me just double check that it was update message. So let me copy that and put a dot and then paste this in. So now we have a reference to that div, and down here we want to basically update the text content. So first of all, let me do another comment. I'm going to say show, then hide the update message. And by show and hide, I mean we're going to show it for a few seconds so it appears on the screen, and then we're going to hide it again. So it just flashes up for a few seconds like a little notification to say, look, we've changed your name, and then it disappears after a few seconds. So the first thing we need to do is update that text. So we'll say update message, which is the reference up here that we just got, so that div, and then we're going to set the inner text of that equal to something, and that is going to be set equal to a template string because we're going to output whatever the new name is. So let me now say your name was updated to, then we're going to output the variable, so dollar curly braces, and we're going to output this new name, which is what they typed in, like so. Now that is going to show it on the page over here, and let me demo this. Let me just try updating the name. I'm going to say now update it to, not Sean, it's already Sean, Luigi. Update, and now we see your name was updated to Luigi. Now it stays there forever now. That's always there. So what I want to do is show this for a few seconds, then hide it. Now to do that, what we could do is use the set timeout function. Because remember, set timeout is going to fire a function after a few seconds, or after however long we want to specify. So I could specify 3 seconds and say, look, after 3 seconds, fire a function which is then going to hide this text or reset the text so there's nothing there. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Set timeout. And inside here, we'll pass a function, which is an arrow function. We're also going to pass as a second parameter, which is after how long we want this function to fire. I'm going to say 3000 milliseconds, which is 3 seconds. And then, in fact, we don't need these curly braces because it's all going to go on one line, this function. And then I'm going to say update message, which is this thing right here, this reference to the div that contains this text. Then again, we're going to set the inner text. And this time we're going to set it equal to a blank string. So whatever it was before, it deletes all that. So this is going to show first. Then after 3 seconds, it's going to reset it so there's nothing inside that. And we're not going to see it. So now if I come over here, I'm going to update my name to Toad, press update. Your name was updated to Toad, but after 3 seconds, this should disappear. So now it's like a mini notification. Now next, I just want to make it so that that looks at least a little bit better, maybe centralize the text and give it some padding. So I'm going to go back to my styles over here, and I'm going to grab that class, whatever it was called, update message, like so, and I'm just going to say text align center, and I'm also going to say margin 20 pixels and auto. So let me save this and see if it works. I'm going to just quickly get rid of that error and update the name again, Luigi, press enter, and now this looks a bit better. We could have also done this using some Bootstrap classes, to be fair, down here. We could have given it a text-center class, an MY3 or something like that. But for whatever reason, I decided to add my own CSS. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, so that's the first step done. Now when we add a new message, so let me just do this again. I'm going to change it to Luigi, update it. So now inside our chat room instance, the name property should be Luigi. And let me just demo this. I'm going to type out chat room up here. And if I press enter, now we can see the name property over here, the username property is Luigi. So if I was to add a new chat down here to say, yes, sure, in response to this question, press send. Now we can see that Luigi was the one that said that thing. So this has all worked. And if I change it back to Mario update and then say count me in 2 and press send, now we can see Mario wrote this message. So this is all working. However, if I now refresh the page and then come over here and type a message now saying, hey, I'm back, and press send, now you can see it resets itself back to Sean, because every time we start this application, down here we're setting the default name to be Sean. Now I don't really want that to happen. What I'd like to do whenever we update our name is to store that in local storage. Then if we close off the chat room or refresh the page and then come back, then we can check if a name exists in local storage. If it does, then we're going to initialize the chat room with that name. If it doesn't, then maybe we'll give this a name of anon or anonymous or something like that. So how are we going to do this? Well, the first step is to come over to the chat class over here. And when we update our name, this is when we want to store something in local storage. Now remember, to do that, we just say local storage. And then we can say .set item. And then in parentheses, 2 arguments. First of all, the argument name, and that is going to be a username. So I'll say username right here. And then the value, which is going to be username, the value we take in right here. So now we're setting this property or this value in local storage. So if I save this now, what I'm going to do is come over to update name, and I'm going to change this to Mario. Now, if I update that and then go to application, we can see over here, we still have all of the data from the last project we did, the city and stews, but we also have this username thing right here now as well, Mario. So now we can perform a check when we first load the application. Does this username key exist in local storage? And if it does, let's get that value and let's update the name of the chat room so it's this value. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. So I'm going to come back to the console, then over here, what I'm going to do inside app.js, when the application first loads, this is where I'm going to perform that little check. So let me do this right here before we actually create the class instance, because we need to know at this point what name we're going to use. So a little comment to say check local storage for a name. Okay, so the way I'm going to do this is by using a ternary operator. And remember, a ternary operator checks a certain condition to see whether it's true or false. If it's true, it returns one value. If it's false, it returns a different value. And we store that value in some kind of variable. So I'll create a constant called username and set it equal to local storage dot username. So this right here, this is the condition we're checking. Now, if there is a username key in local storage, then this is going to be truthy because there will be a value, and any kind of value, which is a string of any length, will be a truthy value. If this doesn't exist, then there's not going to be a value. It's going to be a lack of value, and that will be falsy. So after that, we place our question mark because we're evaluating this condition right here. Then after the question mark, we do the first value, which will be returned if this is true. So if this is true, what value do we want to store in username? Well, we actually want to store this value, the username, in local storage. So I can copy that and just paste it again right here. So if this exists, we're going to return this value, which is then stored in username. So we've reached in and grabbed that value from local storage. Then we do a colon. And after the colon, we return a different value if this username key does not exist in local storage. And that value is just going to be a none in a string. So this is going to be the default value, if you like. If there's no name already stored in local storage, when a user first comes to the website, they're going to have a name of a none until they update it. So then now we have this value stored in username, and that's either going to be this or this, depending on whether they have that value. So when we now create the new chat room, we don't want to pass in Sean, we want to pass in this thing, which is going to be that one of two values. So let me pass this in and do that, save it. Now what I'm going to do first of all is go over to application again, because I want to clear all these things. So I'm going to press this to clear all of them. So now we have nothing stored in local storage. Now if I refresh this now, and come down here and do a message, I'm just going to say test and press send. Now we can see that my name is a none because we didn't have this value. This was falsy, therefore we return the second value, which is now stored in here. Then when we create that chat room instance, we're passing in that a none value over here. So that is the username property now. And I can demo that by saying chat room, which is our instance, and we can see a none is the name, or the username rather. Okay, so username and none. Now, if I go and update this to Luigi and press update, first of all, let me just log out chat room so we can see this. Now we can see the name right here. The username is Luigi. If we go to application over here as well, we can see the username is Luigi. And now if I was to refresh the page and then come down here and type a message and say, hey again, press enter, you can see it's Luigi. It's not a none this time because we've done this check when the application first starts to see, does this exist? Well, yeah, it does in this case because we stored that value Luigi. Therefore, we return that value, and when we create our chat room instance, we're passing in Luigi, that value. So there we go, my friend. That is how we update the name and how we store that name in local storage.